He threw a Coke at a black woman in front of the entire office, laughed, mocked her, and walked away like she was nothing. But what he didn't know was that the woman he just humiliated was the CEO's wife. And when the truth came out, his career didn't just take a hit, it went up in flames. It was a regular Wednesday at Ridgestone Tech. Sleek glass walls, coffee machines humming, and the usual mix of quiet stress and corporate small talk. Everyone was in their own world. That's when Brent Saunders walked in, loud as ever. Brent was the kind of guy who thought he was more important than he actually was. Mid-level marketing strategist. Overpaid, overdressed, overconfident. He talked like he ran the place, always bragging about his connections, his money, his gym routine, and how he almost made VP. But if there was one thing Brent loved more than himself, it was showing off in front of others, especially if he had an audience. The break room that morning was full, employees waiting their turn at the vending machines, grabbing their morning snacks, chatting about meetings. And then Brent saw her, a black woman, maybe in her late 30s or early 40s, dressed simply but elegantly. No ID badge, no clipboard, just calmly standing there, checking her phone. That was enough for Brent to make a snap judgment. She wasn't dressed in a suit. She wasn't carrying a laptop. She didn't look like one of them. In Brent's mind, she was probably someone's assistant. Or worse, someone who didn't even belong in the building. And Brent didn't like that. Not in his break room. He walked right up, chest puffed, and said loud enough for people around to hear, "Hey, mind stepping aside? These machines are for employees, not visitors." The woman looked up, surprised but calm. "I'm not in a rush," she said gently. "You could go ahead." That could have been the end of it. A simple moment. But Brent wasn't looking for simple. He was looking for dominance. He laughed and kept going, "Nah, it's cool. I just didn't want to get written up for harassing guests, especially ones who can't read signs that say staff only." A few heads turned. The room went quieter. Some people looked down, some side-eyed Brent, but no one said anything. The woman didn't respond. She just stood there, unbothered. But Brent was on a roll. He grabbed a can of Coke from the vending machine, popped it open with a dramatic TSSSD, took a fake sip, and, in what he probably thought was a playful flex, flicked the can in her direction. Maybe he didn't mean to hit her. Maybe he just wanted to scare her. But the Coke slipped from his hand, hit the side of the machine, bounced off, and exploded. Fizz, soda, and shame sprayed across her cream-colored blouse. The room went dead silent. Everyone froze. You could feel the discomfort like static in the air. One guy near the microwave half laughed, then instantly regretted it. Brent smirked for a second until he saw her face. Not angry, not yelling, just quiet, calm, still holding her phone. She looked down at her blouse, wiped a few drops off with a tissue from her purse, and looked Brent in the eye. "Excuse me," she said softly, and walked away. Brent stood there awkwardly, trying to play it cool. "Relax," he said to no one in particular. "It's just soda." A few people chuckled nervously, trying not to get involved. One whispered, "Dude, that wasn't okay." But Brent waved it off. Whatever. If she can't take a joke, she shouldn't be in the office. What Brent didn't know, and what he was about to learn, was that the woman he just disrespected wasn't just in the office. She was connected to it in a way that would soon ruin his entire career. Brent thought he'd won. He walked out of the break room like nothing had happened, like he hadn't just embarrassed someone in front of a dozen people. He went straight to his desk, threw on his headphones, and started bragging in Slack messages to a few buddies across the floor. "You should have seen her face," he typed, laughing to himself. Looked like she was about to cry. Should have stayed in the lobby where visitors belong. What Brent didn't notice was the mood in the office beginning to shift. People weren't laughing. They were whispering. Side chats were happening. Screens dimmed when he walked by. There was no official memo, no announcement, no sudden HR alert, but something was brewing. And it wasn't just awkwardness. People who had witnessed the Coke incident started retelling it. First in hushed tones, then through email, then in private Teams messages. Who was that woman? Did Brent just throw soda at her? She looked important. No one was quite sure who she was, but they all agreed on one thing. She hadn't reacted like someone who was afraid. She hadn't stormed off in tears, hadn't filed a complaint. She had walked away like someone who didn't need to argue, because the truth would speak for itself. Meanwhile, Brent was having a great day. Or so he thought. He had a meeting in an hour with senior leadership to discuss a new pitch. He was already imagining the praise. He kept checking his reflection in his screen, adjusting his collar. At 11:47 a.m., a message popped up on his screen. Please report to conference room B. CEO David Carter has requested your presence. Brent's chest swelled with pride. Finally, he thought, recognition from the top. He grabbed his tablet and made his way down the hall, completely unaware of what was waiting for him. When he opened the door, the room was half full. A few managers, 2 VPs, the head of HR, and sitting at the head of the table, in a navy blue suit, was David Carter, CEO of Ridgestone Tech Sharp. Serious, known for his calm demeanor but firm leadership. Everyone respected David. Brent walked in like he belonged there, flashing a confident smile. "Good morning, everyone," he said smoothly, taking a seat. But no one smiled back. The energy was cold, controlled, measured. Then David stood up, and next to him, rising from her chair, was the same woman from the break room. Brent's face dropped. His mouth opened slightly. His heart stopped. Before he could say a word, David spoke, his voice calm but piercing. "Brent, do you know my wife, Tanya?" Brent stared at the woman, the one he had humiliated just hours earlier. She wasn't holding a coffee cup now. She wasn't standing quietly by a vending machine. She was standing beside the most powerful man in the company and looking Brent dead in the eye. Brent's voice cracked. "I didn't realize," David cut him off, "that she was someone who deserved respect, or that she was someone you couldn't mistreat because of her title." Brent stammered, "No, I mean, I didn't know she was your wife." "That's the problem," David said, narrowing his eyes. "You only treat people decently when they have power, and even then, you think you're untouchable." The silence that followed was heavy. Brent's mind was spinning. He couldn't breathe, couldn't think. He tried to explain, to backtrack, to say it was just a joke, but no one was listening. His fate had already been sealed the moment that Coke hit Tanya's blouse. The room stayed silent for what felt like forever. Brent sat frozen in his chair, sweat starting to form under his collar. The fake confidence he carried everywhere was gone, replaced by panic. David Carter didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He simply looked at Brent and said, "I built this company on 2 things, talent and respect. You've shown us one, but completely failed the other." Brent opened his mouth again, hoping to salvage whatever dignity he had left. "Sir, I didn't mean any disrespect to your wife. I didn't know who she was," but Tanya finally spoke, her voice quiet but firm. "And if I wasn't the CEO's wife, Brent, would your behavior have been any different?" Brent blinked, caught completely off guard. She wasn't yelling. She wasn't crying. She was just standing there, in total control. That calm confidence shook him more than anything else. He couldn't answer her, because the real answer was yes. He absolutely would have continued treating her like she didn't belong. Tanya continued, "You didn't just throw a soda. You threw your assumptions, your judgment, your ignorance. And you made it clear that in your world, people like me don't deserve to be respected unless they come with a title or a suit." A few heads in the room nodded slowly. The senior VP glanced at the head of HR, who quietly opened a folder and slid a document across the table toward Brent. "This," she said, "is your formal termination letter. Effective immediately." Brent's mouth dropped. "Wait, I'm being fired." David looked him dead in the eye. "You represent our brand, our culture, and our values, whether you're in a boardroom or a break room. And you failed on all counts." Brent stared at the letter, stunned. "But what about my pitch? The leadership summit next week?" "I was told I'd be presenting," David calmly interrupted. "You were, until you showed us who you really are. Now someone else will be stepping up. Someone who understands that leadership starts with how you treat people when you think no one's watching." Brent's face was drained of color. He reached for the paper with trembling hands, but deep down, he knew this wasn't something he could talk his way out of. He'd spent months building his ego in that office, and just 30 seconds destroying it. The damage wasn't just professional. It was personal. People in that room would remember this moment forever. He stood up slowly, gripping the folder like it might disappear if he held it tight enough. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. almost whispering, "It won't happen again." But David simply replied, "You're right. It won't." Brent walked out of the room, past the desks of people who had once laughed at his jokes, now avoiding eye contact, past the vending machine, past the break room where it all started. And as he pushed open the front doors of the building, the same doors Tanya had calmly walked through just a few hours earlier, he realized something he never understood before. You never know who you're talking to. And more importantly, you would never know who's watching when you show the worst parts of yourself. The room stayed quiet for a long time after Brent left. No one said much. No one really needed to. What had just happened was bigger than office politics. It wasn't just about Brent or even about the soda. It was about the culture of the workplace, the unspoken rules, the silent biases, and the way people like Brent thought they could treat others without consequence. Tanya remained standing for a moment, composed and graceful, before she finally sat back down beside her husband. David leaned over and whispered something to her, something only she could hear. She smiled gently, nodded, and placed a hand on his. The message had been delivered, and it didn't need to be shouted to be heard. One of the senior directors finally cleared his throat. That, he said quietly, was one of the most powerful leadership moments I've ever witnessed. A few others murmured in agreement. But Tanya didn't gloat. She didn't smirk. She simply said, "I didn't want to embarrass him. I wanted him to see himself." That line would be repeated by employees in the office for weeks afterward. I wanted him to see himself. Because that's what true accountability feels like. Not punishment for the sake of revenge, but a mirror held up to your actions. The impact didn't stop there. Within a week, the company began rolling out a new initiative focused on workplace respect, inclusion, and unconscious bias training. But this wasn't some box-checking corporate program. This came from the top, and everyone knew exactly why. For days, the break room felt different. More alert, more human. People started greeting each other more intentionally, checking their assumptions, holding doors, saying thank you. It was subtle, but it was real. Brent's name became a cautionary whisper, not in a gossipy way, but as a reminder. A story, a lesson. The guy who threw a Coke and lost his career in a single morning. As for Tanya, she didn't return to the office again for a while. She didn't need to. Her presence had already left an imprint. But for those who saw her, really saw her, they understood something deeper. That true power doesn't need to raise its voice. It doesn't need to wear a name tag. It doesn't need to declare itself out loud. True power walks in quietly and changes everything. What happened at Ridgestone Tech that day wasn't just a moment of corporate drama. It became something bigger, a real-life story that revealed something most people are too afraid to admit, that how we treat others when no one's watching says more about us than any job title ever will. Brent didn't just throw a Coke can. He threw away his entire career in one moment of arrogance. And it wasn't because he lost his temper. It was because he revealed his truth. The truth was, Brent never saw Tanya as a person worth respecting. She wasn't dressed like an executive. She didn't look like someone who had power. So he treated her like she didn't matter. It wasn't personal. That's the scariest part. It was automatic. He had trained himself to respond that way. The smirks, the jokes, the comments he made, not just that day, but probably many times before. That day, it just happened in front of the wrong person. But here's the thing. Tanya never planned for that moment to turn into a lesson. She didn't walk into Ridgestone Tech looking for revenge or to expose someone. She was there to surprise her husband for lunch. That's it. She didn't expect to be insulted or mocked or covered in soda. But when it happened, she made a choice most people wouldn't have the strength to make. She chose not to fight back with anger. She chose to let her silence speak louder than any outburst ever could. And that silence? That calm walk out of the break room? That's what made people stop and think. That's what made the story spread through the office like wildfire. Because deep down, everyone in that building knew something important had just happened, even if they didn't fully understand it yet. When Brent was fired, some people were shocked. Others weren't. But what surprised everyone was how fast the tone of the office shifted. It wasn't fear. It was reflection. People started realizing how often they overlooked others. How often they judged coworkers by their clothes, their tone, their race, their age, their title, or lack of one. You could feel in the air. Eye contact became more intentional. Conversations got a little more thoughtful. Even the way people treated the front desk staff started to shift. It was as if the entire building had been forced to look in a mirror. And for some, it was the first time they didn't like what they saw. The CEO, David Carter, never made a public statement about what happened. He didn't need to. The message was already written in action. Brent's exit, the HR reform, the new training sessions. But more importantly, the fact that the CEO stood by his wife. Not because she was the CEO's wife, but because she was a human being who deserved basic respect. David didn't defend Tanya because she was special. He defended her because everyone in that building should have treated her better, regardless of who she was. And that's where the real message lies. Because the truth is, Tanya could have been anyone. She could have been an intern, a janitor, a visitor, a new hire on her first day. Would that have made the way Brent treated her okay? No, because this story isn't just about power. It's about principle. It's about what we reveal about ourselves when we think the person in front of us has nothing to offer. This wasn't just Brent's failure. It was a wake-up call to every person in that office who had ever judged someone too quickly, who had ever looked down on someone because they didn't look important. The quiet woman with a calm face and a phone in her hand, that woman was the mirror. And when Brent saw her, he only saw what he expected to see. Nothing more. That mistake cost him everything. What's powerful about this story isn't just the fallout. It's Tanya, the way she never had to shout to be heard, the way she let her presence speak, her dignity remain untouched, even while soda dripped from her blouse. That's the kind of strength you can't teach. That's the kind of power that doesn't come from position, but from self-respect. And make no mistake, everyone in that office learned something that day. Not because of a rule book, not because of corporate policy, but because they witnessed something real, something human, something raw. For weeks afterward, people talked about her. Not because she made a scene, but because she didn't. In a world where everyone wants to be loud, she was silent, and her silence screamed. One coworker later said, "I've never felt so small just watching someone walk away." That's the effect she had. Not through rage, through grace. And what about Brent? Well, last anyone heard, he was job hunting. Rumors floated that he had tried to get into another firm, but word travels fast in certain industries. And when the story made its way to LinkedIn, anonymously at first, recruiters quietly stepped back. No one wanted to be the one who brought the Coke guy into their company. That moment had to find him, not because he made a mistake, but because he showed his character in the moment that counted most. You see, character isn't what you show in a job interview. It's not your LinkedIn bio or your three-piece suit. It's what you do when no one's keeping score. When you think you're talking to someone beneath you, that's when your real values come out. And so, we ask you, what would you have done if you were standing in that break room? Would you have spoken up? Stayed quiet? Laughed nervously? Walked away? Because the truth is, we all face these quiet choices every single day. And while they may not always end in someone getting fired, they do shape the kind of person we become. This story might feel like an extreme example, but it's not as rare as you think. People like Brent walk through workplaces every day. And people like Tanya, quiet, composed, resilient, they face these small battles constantly. Not all of them end with justice, but every single one leaves a mark. So maybe the real takeaway isn't about Brent or Tanya or even David. Maybe it's about us, the kind of coworkers we want to be, the kind of humans we want to be, and the kind of culture we help create, not with policies, but with choices. If this story made you reflect, even for a moment, we invite you to carry that feeling into your next conversation, your next meeting, your next interaction with someone who looks like they have nothing to offer. Because you never really know who you're speaking to. And more importantly, you never know who's watching when your true self shows up. If this story moved you, opened your eyes, or made you question even a little bit of your daily behavior, then you belong here. Subscribe to our channel, Moral Mirror, where we don't just tell stories, we reflect what they say about all of us. Because every story is a mirror, and sometimes what you see in it can change everything.